Any questions?
Hi there, folks. Lovely to get to speak to all of you virtually tonight. As Carolyn said, my name is Rob Scragg. I'm a northeast-based crime writer. Being published for about 4 years now. Book number 4 is due out in January, and all are part of a series starring my detective pairing of Jake Porter and Nick Stiles. That's kind of what's got me published so far. I've got a few other ideas to stray away from that eventually, but that's kind of the mainstay of what I've written so far, and just really been enjoying getting to grips with what lockdown life looks like as a writer. It's been interesting with some deadlines during lockdown and what have you as well. So the mainstay of.
Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, got a bit of an echo of feedback there.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So to get started, I read What Falls Between the Cracks. Yeah. And it's got a really atmospheric beginning with a flat that's kind of been abandoned since the early 80s. What inspired that story?
Do you know what it is? I love the idea of pulling together a problem and a puzzle for my detectives to solve that they couldn't do exclusively with DNA, CCTV, mobile phone footage and data and that kind of stuff. So I wanted to take it far enough back before a lot of that stuff became commonplace. And then I started to think, how far could you push that? How far back could enough evidence exist and survive to ultimately solve things, but just to make it really, really difficult for them? And it was a bit tricky with some of the bits. I had to do a fair bit of research in terms of what evidence could survive that long, how to make it realistic that no one would have even bothered knocking on her door, looking for her, investigating the fact that no one's been seen coming or going or that kind of stuff. So it was very much to try and really ramp up the difficulty factor. It actually started off life as something completely different. It was still going to be an abandoned flat, but it was going to be a body in a bathtub encased in concrete. And I couldn't quite satisfy myself in terms of, would it be too heavy? Would it ultimately fall through the floorboards? And I couldn't find enough solid, factual-based stuff to make me confident I wouldn't be pulled up on that. So I had to come up with something a little bit different. But yeah, still just love that idea of something that's lain untouched and undiscovered for so long to really make them feel at a disadvantage when everything kicks off.
So you were saying you had to do a lot of research to see what stuff would survive from that time. Did you come across anything surprising while you were doing that research?
Yeah, do you know what it is? I'll be completely honest with you. When I wrote the first draft, I didn't research an awful lot as I went for the very, very first draft, and I just wanted to get it down. And then I actually used a manuscript assessment service before I sent it off to any agents, and it was that point at which they pulled me up on quite a few of these things and said, well, yeah, would that fingerprint have survived 30 years in that kind of environment? And what kind of state would the blood be in? And that's what then got me thinking, actually, I was just a little bit impatient when I first started and thought, you know what, I just want to get it down. But I had to change a few bits around to make it plausible. So again, without giving too much away, but for example, fingerprints are more likely to survive in certain areas of a flat if there were any kind of greasy or fatty deposits around a cooker, for example, rather than just on a doorknob where a postman might come and touch it or all that kind of stuff. How far any blood would degrade, whether you could still get DNA from 30-year-old blood, whether that makes it more difficult. So I kind of did it back to front. I wrote it first and then had someone else kind of point out the flaws, and I thought, oh yeah, that's a fair point. But I've learned from that since. I'd do a little bit more research in advance now.
Do you have any experts that you consult for your research?
Again, I didn't the first time round, but and it was a bit daft really, because looking back, I thought actually I do know 2 former detective inspectors, and I was almost in such a rush looking back now to try and get the words down that I didn't really stop to think. But about 12 months after that, it's a friend of a friend. It works as a civilian for Northumbria Police, and she put me in touch with a serving DCI who kindly said he would answer all my questions. I don't think he realised how many I had at the time. So I kind of rocked up at the station at Forth Banks in Newcastle with this list, and it was like, you know, on a kind of a Warner Brothers cartoon, someone opens the pad of paper and it just goes. So I had like dozens and dozens of questions, but it's just such a good session with him. Even just little things like the particular book I asked him questions about had a car chase sequence in, and little things like what language do they use when they're talking to other cars over the airwaves, and what tactics would they use? Like, would they literally ram someone off the road? Would they box them in? Are they allowed to make contact? Do they have to just kind of try and steer them towards where they want to go? And that kind of stuff, try as I might, I couldn't find enough to satisfy myself on Google. So that kind of stuff was invaluable, having his input. He did say I could keep his contact details to go back to since again, so I've still got his number on my phone, if and when I need it. And then the other person who was really helpful, you may have come across her as Dame Sue Black, who is I think she was at Dundee University at the time, and is a well-renowned expert in forensic anthropology. And 3 years ago, I want to say 3 years ago, I was up at Bloody Scotland Festival in Stirling as part of their Crime in the Spotlight feature, where authors who were just starting out got to speak and do a bit of it was like a 5-minute pitch before each event. And I went on before Sue, and she'd read my book before I turned up, and she said, "Oh, you know, if there's any questions you've got about any research or anything like that, you've got my email address, drop me a line." And for book 3 in particular, she was very, very helpful in terms of some of the more grisly, gruesome aspects, like rates of decomposition, how a body would fare in particular surroundings and circumstances, and stuff like that, because that's not something I've got any personal experience of, and it was pretty hard to find anything or find enough just via Google to make me feel like I was doing it justice.
So you said in your introduction about writing in lockdown. How has that been for you?
Do you know what? In a weird kind of way, it's kind of helped, because I haven't really had any time off during lockdown. I've been able to work from home for my day job, and everything's just it's felt really, really compressed. So day job has been even busier, if you can believe that. I've got 2 small children. I've got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So any spare time kind of during the day or weekends is all spoken for, really. So when I got the contract for book 4, which I signed, off the top of my head, I think that was May. Can't remember the exact date. With an August delivery date, I thought, you know what, I haven't got any. There's no margin for error. I can't sit and twiddle my thumbs. I need to crack on and do it. And I always work better with a deadline. And it was end of August was the actual deadline, and I think I got it done about the 10th of July. And that was just a lot of late nights, a lot of coffee, a lot of early mornings. And it was just such a relief to plough through it that fast. I don't know if I could have done it quite that fast had it not been for lockdown, with everything I've got going on with the on the family side of things. But yeah, it's helped so far. Whether that continues to be the case or not, I guess we'll wait and see.
So we've got a question on the stream from TG, who's one of our author members. And she says, "Are you a plotter or a pantser?"
I would put myself somewhere in the middle, and I'm going to steal somebody else's words who came up with the third option, which is a planter. I don't plot as much as some people I've heard. If I think of some of the authors I love to read, the likes of Jon Nesbo, I went to see him talk once, and he said sometimes he'll plot and plan for up to 6 months before he even writes the first sentence, and that would drive me bonkers. It really would. I couldn't wait that long. But equally, I need to know how it ends before I start. I don't always know everything in the middle, but I need to know how it starts, how it ends, and then I kind of feel my way between the two. So, yeah, squarely in the middle, really. Before I start, I'll have a chapter list. I'll know whose point of view it's from, and I'll have literally 1 or 2 sentences per chapter. It would be something as basic as Rob does a chat with Caroline and sees someone creeping in the shadows behind her, for example, but it won't be any more detailed than that. So I know what that starting point is, and I kind of take it from there.
Do you keep like a character Bible for your characters because you've got a series, so that you don't sort of miss any details out about them?
Do you know what? I didn't to start with, but I absolutely do now. I've had to go back. I was probably about halfway through book 2, and I found myself so many times having to go back to the final draft of the original manuscript and doing word searches for things like eyes to check that I had Jake Porter's eye color right, or his specific address, like what his house looks like, because I've seen other people get pulled up for just tiny details. As it happens, there are still 1 or 2 errors that manage to slip through the cracks without wanting to play on words with the title. I say a couple. There's one that I can still think of where Jake, I forget which way around it is now, either drives to a shop and then just leaves and walks home, or vice versa. And that's the most common email I've received from readers after they've got through it. They're like, "Did you realise you just left his car willy-nilly at the supermarket?" And that got through, God knows how many rounds of edits. But for little things like physical descriptions, basic characteristics, like their background, their age, any real likes, dislikes, any family, that kind of stuff, I've now got a separate document that I can refer to, and it's just like a little bio, just to keep me honest.
I'm going to ask you one of my favourite questions, which is, would you make a graphic novel of one of your books?
Ooh. Yeah, I think that'd be quite cool, actually. I've got, I was a massive comic book fan when I was a kid. I've kind of drifted away from it now, but I've still got hundreds of them in the loft. So the visual side of things definitely would still appeal to me. How well the detective stuff would translate, I don't know. I'd be willing to give it a go. I've got some ideas for kids' books, illustrated picture books for kids, which I've written the text for a couple of them, and my brother has been doing some illustrations. So once I have a better idea of what the next step is in terms of the next book after book 4, then that might be something I'd like to explore as well. But yeah, I'd definitely be game for that.
So apart from like illustrated kids books, are there any other genres that you'd want to explore as an author?
And this is where it gets frustrating having the day job still. Not that I'm complaining, because it pays for the mortgage, and God knows I couldn't do without it at this stage. But I've got a planning document, like a one-stop shop for all my ideas that I've got on the cloud, and that's got a fair few non-crimey related stuff. It's got some kids' picture books. I've got a couple of mid-grade ideas for 11, 12, 13-year-olds, and I've started one of them, but had to shelve that while I cracked on with the latest crime book. And some are just more just contemporary fiction, more kind of family drama type of stuff, which I'd love to explore. All the way through to I'd love to have a crack at writing a few screenplays. I've started one this week, as it happens, while I've been off work. So that's what I was doing a little bit of before this chat, and that's what I'll be doing when we wrap up later on as well. And that is nothing to do with crime. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying dark comedy, but it's more of a comedy. Have you seen a film called I Give It a Year?
No.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my level of humour. So that's kind of what it's aimed at. It's a little bit risque, not too over the top. I'm trying to think of another comparable one. Nothing else springs to mind really, but that's the kind of thing that I'm aiming for with that. And it's I'm probably about a quarter of an hour into it at the minute, off what I think will be about maybe 110 minutes. And that's been really fun, trying something completely different. I've had to try and teach myself in terms of the formatting and all the little on-scene prompts in terms of what you're cutting to and all that kind of stuff. So it's like learning a new language.
There's we're getting quite a few questions coming in on the stream. So one of our members, Eileen Brown, just checking because they just come up as YouTube user on the screen. Says, who are your childhood heroes?
If we're talking about literary heroes, absolutely loved and still do love Tolkien. I've got on my bookshelf over there, I've still got the original Lord of the Rings trilogy that I was bought when I think I was about 10. God knows how many times I've read them. And I used to love the likes of Enid Blyton as well as a kid. Those were definitely the favourites. And then the other one I would throw in the mix as well, which is, again, a pretty common one, but true nonetheless, is Roald Dahl. Used to absolutely love Roald Dahl. I've still got some of the original ones that I had when I was a kid up in my mum and dad's loft that I've been promising to move for years. So if I say if they're watching this, they're not on Facebook. We'll be fine. We'll be safe. They'll stay there for a few more years yet.
Eileen also says there's a boxer in the picture behind you. Is it you?
No. I've done a little bit of boxing in my time. But that is not me. That's Mike Tyson in the black shorts being knocked down by Evander Holyfield. I went to an event that Holyfield did about 6 years ago, I think, in the Federation Brewery in Gateshead. And he came and did a bit of a talk, and then there was a charity auction. So I don't know if you can make out the signature by his purple shorts. So that's one of my prized possessions. Yeah, got to meet him, shake hands, and get the obligatory picture taken. So that was pretty cool. I was actually meant to have, I've not boxed for a little while now, but I was meant to do a charity boxing fight before lockdown hit. So that's another thing I'm looking forward to doing when everything is, well, whenever that might be, as close to normal again as possible.
Other comments wise, we've got one from my dad who is on Facebook who says RE Screenplays Andy Barrett has experience in that area. So I don't know if he might be helpful. And we got one.
I'll take any help I can get my hands on. It's a brand new skill set for me. So,
well, he's a member, so it's pretty friendly. And then we've got another one from TG. She says she writes fantasy paranormal and has just started writing crime. How would you entice her into your series?
Oh, do you know what? And I don't think I've ever probably given the same kind of like elevator pitch twice, because I always change my mind and think, no, that last one was rubbish. Got to do better. So in terms of the series themselves, what I should do is sit down. I'm going to probably sit down after this and try and craft the perfect one. But I would say, generally speaking, if you like your crime, kind of a good balance between dark and humor. That's probably some of the most common feedback I've got, is that the relationships between my characters really stand out off the page as well. So it's not somebody dies, a policeman has to solve it. There's most definitely the human side of that as well, what they've got going on outside of work. Very much humanizing people who have to deal with some pretty nasty, dark stuff. As you say, the first book is all around this 30-year-old crime scene. And the thing that neither of them can get their heads around is why no one has ever looked for this girl in 30 years. None of her friends, none of her family. No one's looked or cared. And for me, it's not just about having someone who goes through the motions and solves a crime. They get invested in it as well. And I want you to get invested in the characters. That's the kind of stuff I have always loved to read as a reader. I buy into the characters, not the story, first and foremost. That's what keeps me coming back for a series. I've got to care about the people and what might happen to them next. So that's hopefully the note I've managed to strike so far. The majority of the reviews and feedback I've had so far made me feel pretty confident on that front. But I guess it's each to their own. But yeah.
So as a reader, when you've got some quiet time and you're not busy writing, working, or boxing, what do you like to read?
Pretty eclectic taste, to be honest. I even try and force myself to read at least half a dozen non-fiction books a year, or if I can, I try and go for one a month. Before I started writing myself, or before I started taking it seriously enough when I was getting published, I'd probably go through anywhere between 1 and 2 books a week, whereas now it's probably a book a week if I'm lucky. Most of it is still crime. So in terms of favourite authors, the ones that really inspired me to put pen to paper. Initially, it was mainly American authors, actually. People like Michael Connolly, Harlan Coben, Robert Crace. Then on the UK side, albeit he lives in the States, but big Lee Child fan. And then I got into just a whole host of other writers that I met mainly when I was doing the kind of the festival circuits as an attendee, just in the crowd. People like Maury Hanna, David Mark Billingham, all that kind of stuff. Whereas now I try and branch out a little bit. Read some great non-fiction stuff in the last couple of years. Adam Kay, This Is Going to Hurt. I don't think I've ever laughed as much at a book. A very, very serious subject matter, but so well written. And I love Malcolm Gladwell as well. I don't know if you've heard of Gladwell or if you've read any of his stuff, but really, really kind of thought-provoking stuff that acts as a really good palate cleanser between crime books. David Sedaris is another one that my brother put me onto. And I think if I read nothing but crime, I get a bit word blind after a while, and I start to find myself almost skim reading after a little while. So I'll take a step back and switch onto something as different as I can. Been through all sorts of phases over the years. Wilbur Smith, kind of more adventure type of stuff. Fantasy, Terry Pratchett. I used to have every single book that he'd written as well. So a pretty eclectic mix, to be honest. Whatever kind of seizes the mood.
It's a good a way to read as any. Eileen Brown says, "Is there anything that frightens you?"
I haven't got any out and out phobias, really. I've come across some people who do have rather interesting ones. An ex-girlfriend of mine, her sister had a phobia of an actual genuine fear of fruit. And I didn't believe her, so she ended up chasing her around a room with an apple, which was kind of, I chuckled at the time, but then when I actually saw how upset it got her, I was like, yeah, maybe we should stop that now. But no, for me, nothing. No, not a phobia as such. Depends if you want to stretch the definition. I'd be afraid of anything happening to my family. I feel like I've got a perfect little bubble going on at the minute. Day job's going well, writing's going well. My eldest's off at university doing really well. She's on track for a first, and then I've got my 2-year-old and my 1-year-old, who are just an absolute pleasure to be around. So yeah, I wouldn't go as far as saying there's an irrational fear that something will eventually go wrong. But no phobias really. How about you? Have you got any?
Oh, loads. Is there anything that you wouldn't write about? Like any topics that you'd steer clear of in your books?
There's nothing I've come across so far. I know there's some topics would be a lot more emotive than others, and I've spoken to other authors who said, look, I would never write anything where a child gets hurt, for example, or if there's any kind of physical abuse or that kind of stuff. I think for me it would depend if I felt it could be, if I could do it justice and do it in a tasteful kind of way, a way that that was respectful enough to the people who were part of that story. I wouldn't be comfortable throwing something quite emotive or quite dark in just for the sake of it. Kind of for shock value or that kind of stuff. It would have to be something that I was really, really comfortable that I could justify why it was there. But I've not come across anything yet. There is one thing that I've, again, heard quite a few other authors mention. And another author friend of mine did this in her latest book where an animal died. Her main antagonist killed a dog. And the reception for that was not good at all. And you kind of look at it on one hand and you think, well, yeah, it's not cool to hurt animals, obviously, but it's fiction. Far worse things happen to the people in the book, and it's an interesting point to kind of ponder over as to why people feel so strongly about an animal being hurt in a book when they've just read about a person being butchered 3 chapters before that. So that has it's made me very mindful of that as a risk. I've never felt the need to have that as a plot point in any of my books so far. That's not to say I never would, but again, having seen the the impact that it's had for other authors, it would have to be absolutely essential to the plot. In fact, I think I've only ever written 2 animals into any of my books. One of them is a cat that Jake Porter has in my series. And then there's another one that is going to be part of a charity anthology that's coming out. I did one with a group of authors earlier this year called Afraid of the Light, where all of the profits went to Samaritans. And we've got another one hopefully coming out closer to Christmas. And I put a dog in that particular short story. I'm happy to share a spoiler that nothing happens that's bad to the dog. The dog survives the story. But when I wrote it, and I sat there afterwards, and I said to my wife, if you got 10 minutes, would you mind just having a quick read? No one else is ready yet. Just let me know what you think. And oh, by the way, I've actually included our dog as a character. We've got a little white staffy called Lola. And as soon as I mentioned that, her face changed. She was like, "Sorry, I can't read that. If you've put a dog in, never mind our dog. Don't be daft." And honestly, it took me 10 full minutes of trying to persuade her and telling her, "Look, I swear on the children's lives, nothing happens to the dog." No, I don't believe it. You write crime. You know, I've read some of the horrible stuff you've done to people. You're just saying this, so I'll read it. Genuinely, nothing happens to the dog. But even just just goes to show, even just the notion of hurting an animal can really set some people off. She did read it in the end.
That's interesting. We're producing a charity anthology in the group.
All right.
It's going to help a special school.
When's that one out?
We don't know yet. We're still collecting stories for it. So I think like the deadline for the stories is end of September, early October, and then we'll go from there.
Is there a theme? I'd stick my hat in the ring for that one as well. And if it's all going for a good cause.
Yeah, I don't think there's a theme. I think it's just, and there's not a set word count either. You can be a bit. Right. There's a bit of a mix. I think the smallest is like 6,000 or something, and then you can go a bit longer if you want.
Yeah, it's good fun writing the shorts as well, to be honest, because it's similar to what I said about the screenplay. It's just a different challenge, and it feels a bit fresh after you've just churned out a 90,000 whatever it is word manuscript. And there's a definite art form to it that I'm not entirely sure I've quite cracked yet, around getting that entire story across in such a way that it only takes 1 or 2 or 3,000, however many words it is. You haven't got the luxury of chapter after chapter after chapter to kind of explain your stuff, but it's, you know, I've seen some really great short stories coming out over the lockdown period. Again, all for charity. There's been a few anthologies that have come out, some cracking stories in there, and it's just lovely to see that. You know, some obviously we'd all rather this hadn't happened, but that some good's able to come out of it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good way of making something from it. So we've got another question from TG. She says, "Who do you base your characters on?"
It's a bit of a mix. So, if as a few people have asked in the past, are any of your characters literally real people? Not in their entirety. There's one that comes quite close. There's one, if I'm being honest, between you, me, and Facebook. There's one that's probably about 90% of the way there for an ex-boss of mine. I have no idea whether he's read the book or whether he could identify him or not. And that was, it wasn't, there's no bad blood there or anything like that. It's just an interesting kind of guy in terms of his appearance and his mannerisms and that kind of stuff that I put him in. But to be honest, most of them are a proper patchwork of people stitched together. So that document that I mentioned where I have all my ideas on, that also includes ideas for characters. So whether it's a name or I'll see someone if I'm back in the days when we were spending more time on trains and public transport. If I spotted someone on the train that just looked like a real kind of intriguing person, I would just scribble a few notes, tap a few notes into my phone. Remember once getting a taxi from my house into Newcastle, and you know how the taxi drivers have their badge at the front, clipped onto the air vents, and it just had quite an intriguing name. I thought it'd be quite a cool name for a character. So kind of sat just off to the side, hoping he can't see. I'm like tapping his name into the notes app on my phone, wondering what he'll think if he sees it. And some of them are based on things that either people I see or conversations that I'll overhear. Probably about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, I used to work 3 or 4 days a week down in London. So I spent a lot of time, obviously didn't have friends or any family down there when I wasn't in the office. So I would just go exploring and kind of wander around. Spend a lot of time in random coffee shops and bars after work, just dinner for one. Not to get the violins out, but there was a lot of time just in my own company, really, and genuinely not intentionally eavesdropping, but you would just hear like little weird, surreal bits of conversation drifting across, and you think, "Oh, what the hell are they talking about?" Like, give you an example. There's one, and I've not even used this line yet. So if anyone tries to steal it, you'll hear from my solicitors. But in a cafe in Covent Garden, and sitting there having a coffee, and I was writing a chapter longhand in a notebook, and the lady who was sat on the table opposite was talking to her friend, and she said, "Yeah, to be honest, if I'd known it was the last time we would pray together, I would have probably told her how I felt." And I was like sat there thinking, why was it the last time? Is she dead? Have you had a big falling out? How did you feel? Why did you not tell her? And then I found myself scribbling that line down, thinking I don't even know when I'm going to use it, or what character I'm going to use it with, or what story it's going to be part of. But it's just an intriguing little prompt, and I've got a collection of that kind of thing, as well as like physical characteristics or that kind of stuff as well.
Helpfully from TG, she says our anthology word count is 3,000 to 10,000 words.
I've just seen that pop up, yeah.
I know. It's useful. And Eileen Brown says, Desert Island, just you. What 3 items would you bring?
Ooh. Is there a power supply to charge my Kindle? Is that cheating?
Not on a desert island.
Is that cheating?
That's definitely cheating. It's not going to be a power thing.
So if I can only take 3 items and I'm stuck there forever, I would have, rather than going for 3 books, which is tempting, I would probably go for the Lord of the Rings trilogy in one big bound volume, because I'll happily reread that. A nice big family photo of everyone on, so I know what I'm missing until I get rescued. And I'm stuck for the 3rd one, other than a mobile phone to call for help. I don't know. I'll take a football so I can keep myself entertained.
Good choices. So another UK CBC favourite question that comes up a lot is, what is your most memorable moment as an author?
To be honest, there's been a couple. My first event as an author was really, really surreal. That was I did an appearance down at York Festival with Amit Dand. Getting my hands on an actual physical copy of the first book was, I can't quite put that into words, how that felt. That was a really significant moment. And when I got chosen to get up and pitch at Harrogate Festival back in 2016. I want to say 2016, I think it was. That felt like a bit of a game changer as well, because it was the first time I'd really shared my work publicly. It was the first time I'd got up and read anything out. Got a good reception. I got 4 yeses. I got 4 business cards and 4 email addresses to send off the manuscript to. I got some really, really good insight and feedback from the people on that panel, none of which who ultimately signed me, but gave me a lot of advice and tips that changed the manuscript after that. And it wasn't too much longer after that, after I'd implemented a lot of those changes, that I ended up signing with my agent as well. So that felt like a pretty big moment. A little bit nerve-wracking, but absolutely worth a while.
So what advice would you give to someone who is starting out as an author now? What's the best way to get themselves out there?
Couple of bits, really. I think the first thing I would say is just write it. It might sound like a stupidly obvious thing to say, but if I look at my own experience, I came up with the idea for book 1 back in 2007, and I wrote 5,000 words and got distracted and other stuff got in the way, and I didn't go back to it until 2011 when I found out that a good friend of mine was writing a book, and it made me think, oh yeah, I should dust that off and see if I can finish that. And even then, it took me another 3 years to finish the manuscript. And I look back at that now and I think, for example, book 4 I wrote in about, I think it was about 65 days. And the one before that I wrote in just under 60. And part of me thinks, I look at how much fun I've had over the last 4 years, both with the actual writing of the books and the festivals and the events and the people I've met and the new friends that I've got. And I think, do you know what? I could have been doing this for 10 years, like for a decade, not just the last 4 years. So just get it written. Don't worry too much about editing as you go, would be my advice. It's whatever works for you. But again, I find that it's easy to almost to use as a bit of a procrastination tool, to go back and constantly edit. Get it done, because you can't edit a blank page. Crack on, and once you've got a finished product, either you can edit it or you can hire an editor to do that, or you can start submitting to agents who, if they see enough in it that they're willing to take a chance on it, they'll help with a bit of that as well. And then the other bit would be, obviously not so much at the moment, but when the face-to-face side of things is up and running again, whenever that might be, get yourself out and about to the festivals and the events as well. I did that for probably 2 or 3 years before I got my agent, and I just met so many people in the industry, authors, other fans, editors, publishers, all sorts, and just such a friendly bunch. So get out there. I've yet to meet an author who isn't happy to stand and answer a few questions, either at an event or at a festival bar, and you can shamelessly pick their brains for as long as as long as they're still stood drinking with you. And it's good fun. To be honest, that's most of my social life is the writing side of things over the last couple of years. Obviously, with having young family and a day job as well, time's kind of precious. So just dive head first into the crime world, really. So those would be the main 2 things.
Do you have a favourite festival or event that you're going to look forward to going to? And go back.
Do you know, if I had to pick one and one only, there's so many good ones out there that my regulars that I try not to miss each year are Harrogate, Stirling, Newcastle. I made it to Bristol year before last. I'd love to go back there again. If I had to pick one, and it's not just because I'm biased because it's my hometown, I would go with Newcastle. And one of the main reasons for that is that, again, it feels like that played a really big part in give me the shove to get where I am now. So I went to the first Newcastle festival, or my first anyway, probably 2015, 2016, and they had a writing workshop run by a couple of authors. There was William Shaw, Barbara Nadell, and I went on a 2-day workshop there, which was the first kind of formal, let's sit down and talk about the actual mechanics of writing a book. The first time I'd ever heard anyone talk about a 3-act structure. First time I'd heard anyone really kind of pick apart and strip it back to its nuts and bolts, rather than just like, oh, I've got this really good idea. Like this happens and this happens and this happens. And talking about character development, all that kind of stuff. And I'd finished the first draft by the time I went, of something else by the time I went there, not the one that got published. And I left there thinking, do you know what? I thought that I had something ready to send off, but actually, I think I'm miles away. And again, that made me really go back and take a long, hard look at where I could improve and how I could apply what I just learned. And And like I said, it's my hometown as well, so it's always going to have a bit of a special place. But it does feel like that helped me get a leg up. And Jackie Collins, who organises and runs that, has been really, really supportive as well. She helped me with my debut launch event. She interviewed me again for my third one, and she's been really, really supportive, as have the rest of the crew there. So that's the one I would go for if I can only choose one.
Cool. How many books are you planning in your current series?
So when I first
an end planned for it,
there isn't an end planned at the minute, to be honest. If you'd asked me when book 1 came out, I would have said probably about 3 or 4. But I'm 4 books in now. I've got another couple of ideas that I think would be a good fit for the characters. So I would certainly be happy as long as my publisher was still happy to keep pressing on with the series. I'd be happy to look at least a couple more there. I don't have an end in mind yet. What I would never want to do is get to the point where I feel like I'm just keeping it going for the sake of keeping it going. I don't know how many books in that would be at the moment. So if it felt like I got to a natural end point as well, I guess I would probably find it hard in terms of the character arcs. I'd find it hard to maybe then feel that it was fresh enough. I did when I was swapping emails with my publisher a few months back about titles for book 4, and I'd sent off a load of ideas to them, and then the one they came back with, I did sit there briefly and think, is this their way of telling me that this could be the last one? Because the title at the moment is End of the Line. Yeah, we'll see. I've definitely got ideas enough to keep them going for at least 2 more books at the moment, though.
When's book 4 coming out?
January. I want to say the 21st off the top of my head. That'll be in hardback and Kindle. Hopefully the audio will come out then as well. I've literally just found out today that they've sold the audio rights on, so that generally coincides, give or take, with the launch, and then the paperbacks I think due for June next year.
So one of our members, Alex Hawley, loves audio books and things. Do you choose who gets to read your audio?
I don't. I had absolutely no say in it. To be honest, I didn't have anyone particular in mind. I've written a couple that haven't been sent out to any publishers yet that are set in the Northeast. And I think with those, there's maybe a couple of actors that I could do a lot worse than if they were available and up for grabs. But with the London ones, I haven't. It's a chap called David Thorpe who reads them. Who I listened to the first one, and I don't know, it was weird hearing someone else read my words out. But I think he's done an absolutely fantastic job. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks myself, through Audible and through BorrowBox on the library system, and there have been a couple of books where I've struggled to really kind of get really kind of hooked in, partly based on the narrator. If you don't get the right person reading, I think it can make it hard for you to stick, or harder anyway, to stick with. So that was a little bit of a worry until I heard him read. Whereas once I did, it was absolutely fine. But I think a good narrator can make or break it. I listened to the audiobook of You by Caroline Kepnes a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that's like the gold standard of the value that a good narrator can add to an audio. Because I watched the TV series as well afterwards, and his voiceover, the guy, I think Penn Bagley or Badgley, the actor, his voiceover actually isn't too far away from the narrator on the audiobook. But I just remember sitting listening to it at the time thinking, like, that is exactly the kind of creepy, sinister kind of voice that I thought this character would have. And he does a superb job. I'd love to go and listen to one of mine being recorded, but unfortunately the studios that they use are down in Oxford, so it's a bit of a hike at the moment.
Do you get a lot of say in your covers and titles?
Covers, I haven't. I know some people who do get more say in them. As it stands, it's not an issue for me. I'm really happy with the covers they've chosen. But I know it does seem to vary from publisher to publisher. So for mine, for example, for What Falls Between the Cracks for this one, they sent me an email with just this graphic on and said, paraphrase now, but words along the lines of having carefully considered several options, this is the one we fell in love with the most, and we hope you will too. Whereas I've got some friends who will get sent 2 or 3 options and say, what do you think? Ultimately, the publisher has the final say. That's certainly in my contract, and I think it's fairly standard. As for the titles, the first one, What Falls Between the Cracks, that was the original title that I submitted with, and they stuck with it. For book 2, which is Nothing Else Remains, that was, I think, either the 12th or the 13th title that I suggested. Originally, this one was called Faceless, and they weren't too keen on that. Felt that they wanted something a little bit more, like a little bit more enigmatic. And I cycled through all sorts before we finally settled on that one. But I say that even then, what I sent through was Until Nothing Else Remains. It was almost like they had to have like the last word and say, well, we just cross one word off. Let's go for Nothing Else Remains instead. And then All That Is Buried, same, probably 8 or 9 options. That was originally called All Fall Down. But I kind of get the rationale for that, because if you search for All Fall Down in Amazon, there's a number of books already called that. So you run the risk of yours not being in the first 1 or 2 that are going to pop up on someone's page, because the more they've got to scroll, the more chance there is that they won't find yours. So yeah, ultimately it's got to be a joint decision, but they've not forced any titles on me, so to speak. I don't know if that happens for others, but each title has been something that I've come up with, just not always the first choice.
It's always interesting though to hear like the different authors give you different answers to those kind of questions. There's a question here that says, if you could meet one author, who would it be?
That's an easy one for me, Stephen King. I probably have been a little bit remiss in not mentioning him when you asked about literary heroes earlier on as well. I've read most of I think it's probably only 2 or 3 of his that I haven't read. Also on writing, his book literally about the writing process is fantastic as well. But if I think back, some of the earlier ones that I read back in it was kind of late 80s, when I was probably still a little bit too young to read them, but I managed to get a copy anyway. That's some of the kind of writing that I aspire to with some of those. So I haven't been over at the States for a while to even make it worthwhile checking how many events, if he still does any events or anything like that. But I would love to bend his ear over a coffee or a pint somewhere.
Do you have like a favorite character or relationship that you created?
I was asked recently, out of my 2 main characters, Jake Porter and his Sergeant Nick Styles, which I preferred. So I'd probably go with the same there, actually, which would be Nick Styles, who's the, I guess, sidekick, for want of a better phrase. He's the more junior of the 2. And that was mainly on the basis that I'd rather go for a beer with him. He's just a little bit more fun. Not there's anything wrong with Jake Porter, but Styles is just a bit more lighthearted. He's a bit, I think, probably a bit closer to me in terms of sense of humor and outlook and that kind of stuff. So I have got a soft spot for him. And then I've got a bit of a soft spot for Jake Porter's cat as well, really purely on the basis that my daughter came up with the name for him. That was many moons ago now. She had a couple of little contributions that are kind of behind the scenes. That was one of them, and I couldn't come up with a name that I liked for his cat, so I asked her, and then it was almost like she already had one ready, and she just went, "Oh yeah, Demetrius." All right, yeah, okay, that works. And then the other little weird contribution is back when I was trying to plot book 1, and I did try and plot this one properly on a big bit of A3. So I had it almost like a flow chart. style thing, and she came up to the spare bedroom and said, "Are you all right, Dad? You look a little bit stressed." And I said, "No, I'm not stressed. I'm just stuck. I'm at a particular point in the plot. I'm just not sure how I'm going to fix this bit." So I went downstairs and made a cup of coffee and came back up, and she'd drawn some little motivational pictures on the bottom of my flip chart, and one of them was a picture of a little miniature cactus with a speech bubble coming up saying, "I'm a tiny cactus, you can do the thing." And then when I got my first publishing deal and I set up a company to kind of for any royalties and stuff to get paid to, and I needed to come up with a company name, so I finished up calling the company Tiny Cactus Limited as a bit of a tribute to her. So
that's really cool. There's another question that we got quite early on that said, "What's your favourite music?"
Similar to books, quite eclectic, to be honest. I was on a radio show last week and I had to pick 5 tunes to play that meant something. So I'd probably go with some of the stuff off there. Like, I love Queen. I picked Ed Sheeran, Thinking Out Loud, because that's my wedding song, my first dance. I love the Foo Fighters. I went for Pretender by the Foo Fighters. The random one in the mix was Band-Aid. Do They Know It's Christmas? I can't remember why or where or how, but that became many moons ago now the kind of the go-to karaoke tune for me and all my friends if we're ever in a bar that's got a karaoke system hooked up. We get some funny looks if we request it in like June or July. But yeah, there isn't, again, there's not one particular type. I've got a proper mix. Some of the playlists on Spotify, it's if there's 20 songs on the playlist, there's 20 different artists. So a bit of everything. I was brought up with a lot of my dad's music in the background, kind of old school stuff like the Eagles and the Beatles as well. Everything from that through to Foo Fighters and Eminem, really.
Do you listen to music while you write?
I do, but I can't listen to anything that's got lyrics. And I can't quite explain it because if I go and sit in a cafe, so there's a place down near where I live called the Surf Cafe down in Tynemouth, and I went down there for about an hour and a half this morning, sat and had a cup of coffee, and had a really productive hour's work done. And obviously there's conversations going on in the background, there's music in the background, and I just seem to be able to tune it out when I'm out and about. If I'm in the house, absolutely not. If it's anything with lyrics, I've got to go and put headphones in and play something orchestral. Like I love movie soundtracks, like kind of Hans Zimmer, Danny Elfman, that kind of stuff. So, what's the guy's name? Trent Reznor, who's from 9 Inch Nails, who does some great movie soundtracks like Gone Girl. I wrote probably most of book 4 to Gone Girl movie soundtrack on constant repeat. Love that kind of stuff. But honestly, if my wife sat there and she's scrolling through Facebook and little videos keep popping up, even just that like tinny little squawk in the background, I've got to go and put my headphones in. It's got to be a psychological thing because it makes no sense that I can sit in a busy cafe or bar.
Do you have I was talking to Nick Quantrill the other day, and he made like a soundtrack for his book that was all kind of music from the area and things. Do you ever sort of think about having things like that for your books?
Do you know, I did consider it for the first one because I had quite a few song references in the first draft. And then another favourite author of mine is John Connolly. And I've been to a couple of his events where when you buy a copy of the book at the event, he's got some proper CDs made up and printed that are the soundtrack for his books. And I sat there at the time and thought, oh, there's quite enough. I think there's enough in there to do like a little album. But when I sent it off to my editor, I started to get queries coming back around, well, have you got permission to use that line and permission for those lyrics? And it was just such a frustrating exercise to even look into that in the end, not only did I take all the lyrics out, because it was just much easier than getting permission and much cheaper. But I just completely forgot about the notion of trying to do any kind of playlist. I literally had one line in from an Eagles song. It was just playing on the radio in the background on a particular scene. And it was the line from Hotel California, "This could be heaven or this could be hell." And my editor had said, no, you need to get permission to use the line. So went away, jumped on Google, Eagles music rights. I got a contact email address, got in touch with them. I got a response back, and they said, yeah, happy to help. Here's the form you need to complete. But as a company, we only own 66.67% of the UK rights and the Australia rights. The remaining percentages with this company. For the US rights, 33.33% is with this company, so you'll have to apply to this company, this company, this. And I would have had to apply to about a dozen different companies purely because of the fact that Allison and Busby bought world English rights. So any English-speaking country that they would publish in, I'd need to get approval for that. And in the end, I just took the line out, and there's just a reference to the song, to Don Henley singing, but there's no lyrics. And if you notice, most authors, certainly in the books I've read, there'll be like an oblique reference to the lyrics without the lyrics themselves. I did manage to get permission to use one line in the acknowledgements for one of my books, which was from Richard Curtis, who wrote Blackadder. And that was just a little corny tribute to my wife. There's a line that Edmund Blackadder used with the Queen in Blackadder II, where he says, life without you is like a broken pencil, pointless. And that was so much easier. I wrote to his agent, and she just said, yeah, let me check with him. Came back a week later. Yeah, he's fine with that. So there was no form, there was no request for payment or anything like that.
I think you can use song titles, can't you, without...
Yeah, I think song titles you're fine, but if there's... And I thought at the start, when I did my first draft, I thought it was... I can't remember who told me this, but I'd been told that as long as it was only a one line here, one line there, that you'd be okay, as long as it's not a substantial chunk or a full verse or anything like that, but apparently not.
I'm going to be even more impressed now with all the authors who do have lyrics in. I've gone through that effort of finding the permissions. We've got 3 minutes left. Do you want to just give everyone a reminder of your books?
I can do. God, that's flown by. Yeah, I'll do a quick little whistle stop tour through. So we've got, I'll see if I can hold them all up at the same time. Can't quite fit them all on the screen. So this is the first in the series, What Falls Between the Cracks. We mentioned before, but just to recap, so there's a 30-year-old crime scene with a young lady who has disappeared without a trace. No one has ever seemed to care enough to look for her. But the title's a bit of a play on words. Did she slip away through the cracks to escape someone or something, or was she given a bit of a shove between the shoulder blades? Nothing Else Remains. Book 2 is about 6 months after book 1. One of Jake Porter's old school friends is about to reconnect with his dad, who he's never met, and his dad and his girlfriend go missing on the same day. And Porter is obviously trying to pick apart what's going on there. His dad's name turns up on a list of 12 others, and he's faced with trying to work out if his dad is pulling strings behind this, if he's behind it all, or if he and the others are actually in danger. And then last but not least, the latest, All That Is Buried, centers around the disappearance of a 7-year-old girl at a fun fair, and the lengths that some people, friends, family, and others will go to keep their own secrets, even at the expense of a missing child. I think this one is still on special offer on Amazon as well, on Kindle, if anyone wants to dive in there. You can read them all as standalones, but I'm a sucker for reading things in order. And then book 4 is literally starts the same day book 3 finishes. And that one is... Again, I've never had to pitch book 4 yet. So book 4, there's quite a shocking crime takes place, a murder takes place at the start that really taps into the whole undercurrent that we've seen in the country over the last couple of years around Brexit, immigration, all that kind of stuff, and really brings out the worst in some people.
That sounds really interesting. I'll check for the Amazon special offer as well and drop it in the group.
Yeah, if you can, that would be fab. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that they can go and catch up and get themselves a book. And then all that remains is to say thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Like I said, it kind of feels like that's been about 10 or 15 minutes, never mind an hour.
I know, time just flies, doesn't it?
It does indeed. No, like I say, thank you very much for having me on. Thanks to everyone who chipped in a few questions as well. And